Hello. So in the first meeting, we presented our individual early engagements with notions of the good. We plan to explore other people's experiences in coming to terms with what's good and what's not. We hope to find differences and similarities and differences between the way we came to understand the golden rule. Instead, we found no moral compass except the golden rule, except treat others as you'd like to be treated. That's as far as I understood that we went. Yeah. It's a bit troublesome for me that we couldn't get further. I would have hoped, but I hope for all kinds of things, you know. We didn't, as far as I can tell. Now we have a second chance to go somewhere after another disturbing week in America, and it was Neil's hip. Lots of things happened this week. I'm pleased that we didn't fall into demonstrations, by the way, of who was the lightning chess champion of political discourse. And I hope we can survive that again. So second meeting, I recommended that in this meeting, we try to connect these early notions of the good with our possession about what we feel is good for the polity, about what we feel is good for the communities we live in. Of those, how did we come to embrace policies that represent our views on how our community can be its best? What rules and models might our citizens adopt? What role is there for government, perhaps? I don't know. Again, my hope was and is that we'll try to understand how we each came to these views by asking each other questions to fill gaps, perhaps, and where it's necessary, to understand another's journey to where they've arrived. Again, we have no binding agreements on how we conduct ourselves. This is an experiment, and it's open, and we'll see where it goes, but we can recommend. If there's no objection, I'll express my wishes, and then I hope each of you will recommend the aspirational boundaries that we think will best assist us in understanding each other during the next 90 minutes. So with your permission, following is my short list. Yeah. Respect, of course. Yeah. 2, as we have no fact checkers, I would hope I can stay situated in our views and avoid using or representing any statements beyond those representing our own views and belief systems as facts. Yeah? We don't have a fact checker. Wishes and beliefs and asking each other non-gotcha questions would be my central preference for how we proceed. I think back on what for me is the absurdity of the debates many of us watched, where each side pontificated and expostulated about this or that irrefutable fact. Again, we have no agreed upon fact checkers, no consensually acceptable Scrabble dictionary, so to speak. We don't have that. Yeah. That would make such facts helpful in reaching towards a goal of understanding each other, if that's truly our goal. 4, I'd prefer if people checked their watches and kept flourishes of ideas to perhaps 3 minutes or something like that. Yeah, that would be, again, these are my preferences. I have no other wishes for today, though I do wonder whether there aren't more basic ethical standards that we haven't yet reported. I found myself wondering if we all, chances are we don't, all accept all of the 10 commandments. Chances are the first few might be difficult for some. I don't know. Or the recommendations on the Sermon on the Mount or Leviticus 19 or wherever your notion of the sacred comes from. And there are lots of such places. So that's all I have to say. Would someone like to begin?
Well, I'd like to clarify what this 10 Commandments thing is all about. I'm not quite sure. You know, I think I have a basic understanding of what some of them are, but I'm not sure, and I'm also not sure that the Ten Commandments or any other religious-based precepts are the only, right, yeah,
I wasn't suggesting that.
yeah, I know.
Uh,
So I just wanted so this whole notion of ethical behavior or moral behavior being based on some authoritative top-down message from above coming down on human beings as a guidelines for moral and ethical behavior. What I often wonder is why we reject the possibility that those precepts come from us, from human beings, and through shared experiences, and they're an outgrowth of the trials and tribulations, or I guess like what Freud mentioned, the vicissitudes of living together as human beings and developing social order and norms that through hit and miss and kind of like hit and miss things that would invariably help build communities or societies. I think my 3 minutes is up.
I mean, I was really wondering though, if you have any notion of how we should proceed. I apologize for any lack of clarity. I wasn't recommending either the Sermon on the Mount or the Ten Commandments or Leviticus 19 as guides. I was suggesting that I suspect we do have other ethical standards that we bring. I imagine you have some, Neil, that come out of your own background in terms of your thinking. But that's what I was wondering, where we should go and whether or not there are other ethical standards that are out there. But, sorry, like clarity.
Maybe if you could, I don't know what the Sermon at the Mount was, or Leviticus 19. So maybe very briefly, like Neil was interested in some of the commandments that he wasn't familiar with.
So the Ten Commandments talk about the existence of a single God.
Right.
Yeah. And the belief in no other gods.
Right.
Respect for parents. Respect for certain other social norms, like not stealing and not killing. There's a curious one about not having envy, although it's not clear what that means because it doesn't fit with everything else in Pentateuch. The Sermon on the Mount carries the golden rule one step further, and Jesus asks people to respect and love their enemies. Really, it's the first time, as far as I know, that anyone suggested the idea of loving enemies. I don't know of that in history before that. And he talks about the fact things like the poor shall inherit the earth, and the idea of social justice comes through the whole sermon and goes into Matthew 6 as well. The sermon is in Matthew 5. What's a Jew talking about Matthew?
No, thank you.
And Leviticus 19 lists a whole bunch of things about honesty in business, about not indulging in trash talk, in gossip, for instance, in maintaining confidentiality, in not failing to protect a friend, and not standing idly by as a neighbor bleeds, actually, is the exact interpretation. But these are standards that are there for some people. We stopped at just the golden rule. I don't know if we go further.
So I think some ideas or some truths are fairly universal. And I don't disagree with any of those scriptural references. I'm religious as well. Without going into it in too depth, I think everybody starts in the same place, and then they start getting further in depth and further in depth, and they get to the point where they start to disagree on the small stuff. And that's where you'll see fractures in religions or different versions of Christianity or different versions of Islam. And I think if we are whatever, we need to figure out what our group right here objective is. Is it to dive down until we find those divisions, or is it to find common ground? Because I think everyone has a common ground. Everyone wants to be treated right. Even the most sociopathic amongst us wants to be treated right. And I don't think anyone's going to disagree on that. So we really would need to quantify or define, why are we here talking, before we can talk about that. Am I wrong?
I think sometimes those minor defects or minor things that separate us are a lot bigger than we assume they are. I mean, I think sometimes it's those small. You know, I'm thinking about my leg right now. You know, it's a very small part of my body, my physical being. I know exactly where it is. And given the totality of my being, of my muscles, of my bones, it's a very small part. And yet, even in its smallness, if I'm lying down in bed, I can't lift my left leg. I mean, it's an obstacle to, you know, I'm a guy, I love to move, I'm a dancer, I love to go out walking, I love to be in motion, and this is hindering my desire to get out of bed or even back into bed, because the pain is so intense when I try to do either one of those. And but again, it's going back to what you were saying about the, you know, it's sometimes it's those small things that we miss, that we don't pay attention to, because we're so busy paying attention to the macro problems, that we miss out on those small cellular things that get in the way, that drive us apart. I mean, just the thing is, like, I live next door to somebody and they're not the same color as me. Big, small thing, and we're all human beings, but, you know, on a macro level, it's a small thing. Or they have a dog that barks at night. I don't know. So it's, you know, it's that can cause so much, what's the word? I don't want to say that, trouble or, you know, enmity between myself and my neighbor.
So then if we go back to the goal, what's the goal? Is it to share those things, to dwell on those things, to get past those things, to let people know that they exist? Like, what's the goal?
I think one of the things Alice has been talking about for years, as I understand, that is whether or not there's a capacity for people who have very different views. And here we're four different people to find out where they disagree and to understand each other inside of those disagreements. Not to try to convert, not to try to proselytize, not to try to prove, but to actually understand each other. And as I understand, that was one of the major goals of her push in catalysis and elsewhere. And it's certainly consistent with my own view. So it's not a matter of right or wrong, but my thought was that if we understand where we come from, at some point we diverge. I don't know where I stand on abortion. And I've been thinking about it since 1970. I mean, thinking about that. A friend of my wife flew into New York where she could get an abortion, and I was given the job of driving her to the center, she asked me what I thought of it. We had 2 kids. I had never thought of aborting them until they were much older. Then I consider, yeah, bad joke, sorry. Uh, and I've not come to a conclusion. I suspect there are people here who have. Somewhere we diverged, and we start in the same place. I mean, that's the kind of interesting thing. We all believe that you should treat others the way you want to be treated, decently, with kindness. I think we all accept that.
I think what happens, I was listening to a really interesting person this morning. His name is Remso Menachem. He's a psychiatrist and a trauma specialist. And he was talking about how all these things affect us on a cellular level. And how, like, I'm thinking about Howard, you just innocently just said, you know, we base these things on certain precepts, the golden rule. And immediately I started bracing myself. I started tensing up, you know, because it's not about it's not about you, it's just about those ideas, those kind of religious ideas or things that I equate to religion. All of a sudden I feel like I get real tense, or just somewhat tense in certain parts of my body, and and it causes me to take like almost like a defensive position, and I have to react to that rather than you just innocently saying something that I agree with totally. I mean, I don't reject the basic precepts of the 10 Commandments or the Eightfold Pathway of Buddhism or these things. I think that what Tyler is saying, they are universal. I don't think you find any disagreement in the core principles of any religious or any philosophical precepts or socialist precepts about what people need to do in order to live together. I don't think anyone could disagree on the macro level about these things, but it's just that bracing that he missed talking about, that can be so innocuous and so innocent in the moment, but can lead to such a difference, or can be the cause of a breakdown in communication between people.
So you're saying that the associating these with a religion is what gets you, right? I mean, in other words, rather than just describing something, a quality or a behavior, it's putting the label on it and the word that causes the problem. I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah, it's my association with religion.
Right.
It's my association with religion, not the thing that's being talked about.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I have the same feeling.
So I think if the goal, and I'm listening, I'm just kind of bringing it back. I think if the goal is to learn how to communicate, that any 2 people can talk about any conversation if some guidelines are followed. And what I mean by that, I'm just going to go back to like freshman college critical analysis. You can talk about anything if you're capable of avoiding the hotspots for it. And if you're defining the definitions of the words that you use up front so that you know you're on the same sheet of paper. In our last conversation, the only reason we brought up abortion was to say that the definition can vary from one day to pre-birth, and we're not talking about the same thing, even though we're using the same word. So I think if the question is, can 2 very different people talk about whatever the conversation is, the answer is yes, if we can either agree on the definitions of the terms or agree on which definition we're going to use for now. Meaning, if we decided to talk about abortion, but we're only talking about the day after pill, we could come to a better idea of what each person thinks. Or if we decided to talk about it, but we're only talking about partial birth, we could come to some sort of an understanding of each other. But if in our personal lives, we recently had some sort of a exposure to that experience, maybe we can't right now talk about it pragmatically. So I guess to answer the question, can we talk about these discussions? Yes, if we can avoid hotspots, define terms, and listen, and then come to a conclusion without feeling the need to convince someone else of our idea, to just listen, because it's okay to disagree. I personally believe it's more important to understand what the other person thinks so you can understand them than it is to try to convince them of your perspective. That way, if they do the same thing, they understand you, and then both people are enlightened instead of, I'll say this real quick and then I'll stop. Everyone wants to be right when everyone should want to be correct. Does that make sense?
I'm going to give you an example of just something that just happened. When you said to avoid hotspots, again, I felt the bracing happening in my body. I'm being told how to approach something. So I'm not sure it's possible for people to agree on a pragmatic approach to a discussion without first getting to where a person is coming from emotionally and feeling states. You know, it's easy to say, these are the rules we're going to follow in a conversation or society. And if we all just abide by them, then everything's going to be fine. But that doesn't take into account how I grew up, going back to our first conversation. What the roots and the source of my values and my ethics are, and how they similar to yours and different to yours, and how the way in which I go about relating to other people. So the way I would go about relating to other people is informed by how and the way I was brought up and raised, and my relationship, my familial relationship, and my relationship to my social groups as a child. So again, it goes back, it can reconnect with Howard's opening statement about the 10 Commandments, and it brings me back to this notion of someone telling me how to do something. I do not like to be told how to do something, even if it's the most innocuous thing, like this is how you put the toothpaste on the toothbrush. So I'm not sure, I'm just not sure that two people, no matter how we lay down the rules for the conversation, you can put two people in a room and have a discussion about something like, is the glass half empty or half full, that they are going to be able to avoid all the traps of their emotional lives and the way in which they hear things and receive things emotionally or Does that make sense? I don't know. I'm gonna make sure.
It makes sense. I guess what's going through my mind is there's two things that went through my mind. One, how do you propose a solution? And two, do you think emotional people are incapable of having pragmatic conversations?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean when you say emotional people. I think we're all emotional people. I think everyone, I even think a sociopath or a psychopath has emotions. So, or feelings, or has sensations in their body, in their corporal being. So I'm not sure what exactly you meant when you said emotional people, that whether or not they can or can't have a conversation.
Maybe I should say people that are more subject to an emotional response. Does anyone else have an input on that?
No, not particularly. But Neil, I'm very comfortable in not talking about religious matters. And I hear that as a kind of request that like made, but it's kind of there, that if I want to have a conversation with you and don't want to cause you some agita, that I should steer clear of mentions of various kinds of scriptures, and I'm happy to do that.
No, not at all.
No,
because that's your emotional space, and I don't want to deprive you of bringing it in. It's my task. It's my task, and I think this is what Tyler's talking about. It's my task to figure out how to accommodate for your emotional state and where your sources, where you're coming from, You know, so if it's necessary, or that comes up, you know, I have to sit here and listen. At the same time, I have to become aware of where that resistance, what the source of that resistance is, and why it's still there for me, and how it interferes with my relationship to you, if it does.
So what's the solution?
A solution?
Yeah, the solution. So like, if I've had some good conversations with Neil earlier, but I'm always looking for the fix, whether I should be or not. It's my male brain. But if I know things about Neil, then I can avoid those conversations, or I can avoid the way that I word things, maybe make different types of jokes or not make jokes that would be offensive. But at the same time, if I don't know that, how can a conversation like that on a visceral topic be had without avoiding those? And let me use this example. I was having a conversation earlier with someone who initiated a question about a political figure and then got very angry that we were talking about the political figure. And I see that, and that's why I say we have to avoid the emotional hotspots, or at least address them in a way that they can be dealt with. Because I know, like, I have respect for Neil's situation. I feel sorry for the things that happened to him in his childhood. I've mentioned some of the things that have happened in my childhood to show that I've also experienced those pains. I just dealt with them differently. So it's not right or wrong. It's just I deal with things in a different manner. So the question is how, like, here's a perfect conversation. This whole discussion is about how does the left and the right talk, or how does this extreme and that extreme talk. Well, first we have to talk, and then we have to listen, and we have to find ways to talk about things that bother us without being mad at or labeling the other person. I know we talked about labels for a second. Are you guys okay if I cover that for a second? I haven't come into this conversation labeling myself a bunch, and it's because I believe that labels are words that you might put on yourself, but the reality is you're painting yourself with the other person's perspective. Meaning, if I call myself something, I know what that means to me, but I don't know what that means to you. And if I come in and use a word that's negative to you, what might be positive to me, I just inadvertently labeled myself with something that doesn't actually match me. So I think in the chat on here, it says definitions of the root of conversational misunderstandings. I would say yes, but it's more not agreeing on definitions are the root of the conversational misunderstandings. That's why I tried to start out with, we got to agree on the words that we're using first, or at least understand what the other person's definition is of those words before we can start to talk about anything. Because if I send a message and you hear something completely different, we're not talking. We think we're talking, but we're not talking. And that's the core root of all of the miscommunication and all of the misunderstanding that is happening all over the place. Someone says something, someone else hears something different. I throw out a label, and my definition of it doesn't match the label that the other person has of me. And they automatically make assumptions and misunderstandings, and it just spirals and spirals and spirals and spirals. So that's why I keep coming back to, we got to define our words the same, because words are just noises that our brain makes to convey an idea. And it doesn't matter what word we use. What matters is that the definitions match. Otherwise, the message that's being sent is not the same message that's being received.
The request I made, by the way, was to ask each of you if you had some thoughts about how we should proceed. And in some way, I'm hearing Gus talking about that, but it has a meta quality for me. It feels as if we're talking about talking. And I don't know if there are guidelines here that you all want. We've spent the half an hour, and I'm not sure where we are. I know where I am. I'm not going to talk about the R word. We'll leave it out. And frankly, I'm not a very religious person anyway. But how shall we proceed?
Again, what's our goal?
Our goal is understanding each other. That's at least the goal that we've adopted from Alice Mayer.
Then we have to pick a topic and share our perspectives on that topic. And it's going to have to be systematic, and it's going to take huge durations of time. I mean, correct me. I'm brainstorming right now.
Yeah, you are, but you normally state these things as facts. And you say we have to.
Well, we don't have to. I'm just saying that it makes sense if we do.
We are free to proceed as we like.
Well, Tyler, before you said, something about agreeing on words, and I just wanted to ask you, well, throw one out. Throw a word out.
Me? Throw a word out?
Yeah, you said something about, it would be helpful to find out, given a word and see what our definitions of a word, what that word is. Or
I don't want to start this conversation, but if we decide to have a conversation about abortion, we have to define what it is. It can't be day after pill and partial birth. They're not the same thing. So if we decide to have that kind of a conversation, we have to quantify. First, we're going to talk about the day after pill, or we're going to talk about however many weeks or whatever. Then we can move forward. Because if I say, let's have a conversation about abortion, and maybe Neil hears, have a conversation about a day after pill, but maybe Susan hears, let's have a conversation about partial birth abortion. We're not on the same sheet of paper, right? So none of us define abortion differently, but we still have to quantify it so that we're talking about the same thing.
I think that last week, the reason the concrete issue of abortion came up was because I was talking about words and labels and how phrases can be hijacked, kidnapped by one side or another to represent a set of opinions. And the terms I used were, one was the right to life, and another one was family values. So I actually really had no intention of getting into the weeds on abortion policy, but what was bothering me was, who says that that I'm not pro-life, right? Or I don't believe in a right to life. That has nothing to do with what some group has said that it means, right? It means being against abortion in some way. I would like to feel comfortable in saying, yeah, I'm really pro-life. I'm happy to be alive, and I'm happy when other people are alive and able to live their lives. So that was really and I think that ties into what has been, said in the chat, that really it's about taking away the labels and just saying, we're really entitled to what do these words mean? How do we feel? It's a much deeper and more maybe what Neil is saying. It's the experience itself.
Maybe these words are almost ad hominem, right? I don't think anyone here is anti-choice or anti-life. We just have a different perspective on how to approach the situation.
And one of the questions that was asked during the conversation between our meetings was, have words already been weaponized? And I think that this is the issue Susan's raising.
Yeah.
In the way words are used, or sayings are used, or expressions are used to somehow already cast shadow on somebody. If you're not pro-life, then you're against life. If you're not pro-police, then you're against the police. I mean, these are things that are pretty clear to us, aren't they?
Well, it becomes, things become matters of life and death so quickly, right? They just, like Susan says, I think between the four of us, we're all pro-life.
Exactly.
Otherwise, we wouldn't be sitting here, right? We'd be jumping out the window or something if we weren't pro-life. And why bother getting up in the morning if you're not pro-life? But again, it's this distinction that we make, these distinctions we make, that it's almost like, is there some impulse in human beings to drive ourselves away from each other? Separation and attachment. Is there some sense of if I allow the other person to have a different opinion, okay, so you believe abortion's bad, and I believe that it's generally okay in 99% of the cases, or whatever, 100% of the cases, it's okay. Do I have to reach for my gun? Do I have to demonize you as some kind of horrible human being who's out to destroy culture and society as we know it? Or how do I find a way to make room in my own person, my psyche? How do I find room how do I find the capability to make space in my being for other people's points of view without feeling that they are out to eradicate me, annihilate me? It's
Especially when it hits core values. I mean, for a person who believes that a capital punishment is murder, it's murder. For a person who believes that abortion is murder, it's murder. And it doesn't become something negotiable. There are certain issues that are, in a sense, not negotiable, even though there were, were attempts. So in the 1992 a Republican platform on abortion, there were the exclusions for rape and incest. Well, hold on. I remember asking the person who wrote this, Marjorie Bell Chambers, if abortion is murder, then even if the pregnancy occurred during rape or incest, it's still murder. It's still murder. How do you do that? She told me that politically I was an asshole. And coming from an 85-year-old woman, I had to consider that seriously. But where does the political bend off from our notion of the good or the ethical or the right? Where does that bend off? And is that part of the problem? Do we really have the same ethical system? And that was a question that kind of hit me last week. Are we just members of different clubs? Or are there really different ethical systems here? I don't know.
I think it bends off when it starts to affect us personally or the people that are around us. I'm trying to think of a good way to explain that. I live in a completely different society, location. You guys are in a flat area. I'm in a mountainous area. I'm trying to collectively place this. You guys are, two of you, I think three of you, but I'm not sure, live in a large city. I don't. So a lot of things that I value or that I need are things that I would fight a little harder for, versus other things that I care about but don't affect me directly. I'm not going to fight as hard for. So that sounds bad, but I'm trying to be pragmatic about this. Like if we were having a gun conversation, I'm going to be pretty solid at fighting for my right to retain the things that I have already, because I think it's extremely important for a multitude of reasons. If we're having a gay marriage conversation, I have opinions on it, but I'm not going to fight for it as hard because it affects friends of mine. It doesn't affect me as much. Does that make sense? I'm trying not to sound heartless with this. Abortion affects me because I'm a father, but not like it would if I was a pregnant, unmarried 17-year-old high schooler. So I guess a lot of these things break off, or they become an attack on our person at that junction where it really starts to affect us. Like me personally, guns are the thing, and I know this is my bias, that I have some really strong beliefs on. And I'm still happy to have that discussion. Even though I have beliefs on abortion and gay marriage and religion and everything else, they're not going to be as strong because they're not as central or as directly affecting of me as some of the other topics would be.
First of all, I'd just like to say I do not live in a flat place. Where I live in
Flatter than me.
Well, where I live in Brooklyn, it's near the highest point. It's near the highest
Really?
elevation of Brooklyn. So I can see from, and on top of it, I live in an apartment building. So I can see from the window I'm looking at all the way down to the Statue of Liberty, and because I'm in an elevated state. But what I'm interested in is, why do we imagine a distinction in the first place?
What do you mean?
Why do, well, you said something about, I imagine that we might see things differently, or about a certain issue. That's just a general summing up of what I thought I heard you saying. And I'm just wondering, not you specifically, I'm just wondering why it is that we so quickly don't imagine how we are similar to each other. We imagine that because you're over there and I'm over here and Susan's down there and Howard's over there, there must be something different about us. I'm on the upper right-hand side and Howard's on the lower right-hand side and Susan's. So then it's almost like my mind immediately starts looking to make distinctions. And I think that's what we do as developing human beings from the time we're infants, is that we immediately born and we distinguish ourselves from our mothers, and then we distinguish ourselves from our mothers and fathers, and we look for ways to be different, to be separate individuals. But in that process, something along the way gets lost, or it kind of gets out of control, where that becomes the more important quality. My differentiating myself from the other, rather than my familiarizing myself with the other. So I'm thinking about my own life experience, and I grew up in Valley Stream, Long Island, and there was one Black family in the whole universe, as far as I could. Well, two Black families in the whole universe. The couple who, the man who took care of our lawn, and the woman who cleaned our house once a week. But they were, they were hired by my family to come in once a week to do these jobs. But at the same time, my mother and father, we treated them not as employees, or they were, we had a relationship with them. And my neighbors across the street, and I mentioned them last week, I'm not going to mention any last names, but they were my friends and family friends, but I've kind of lost track of what I was going to say. But it wasn't until I moved to New Haven, Connecticut, which was a inner city, a very small model inner city with a Black community in it, no white working class community in it, no white professional class community, and you had a Jewish country club, and you had a Christian Goyish country club, and you couldn't belong to the Goyish company if you were a Jew. But I'm sure if you were Christian, you wanted to belong to the Jewish one, you would have no problem, other than your own personal feelings about being around Jews. I'm sure that you would come to sign and they would just say, "You sure you want to join this?" Of course, if you just pay the fee, that's fine with us. But I'm just, this immediate attention to what makes me different from you.
Because that was the objective, is to find where we are similar and then identify where we're different. Because obviously we have a ton of things that are alike, and our situations, the places that we live or the places that we exist, will start to define those differences. When I lived in the bottom of a mountain in southern Idaho, I had to have gas because I needed food, and I couldn't get food unless I drove into town and bought food. So I needed a driver's license. When I lived in a city, I didn't need a driver's license. There's public transportation, and I didn't need to spend money on gas because I can just walk over there and get food. And self-defense was different. And a gun in the mountains is a tool that I use to feed myself or to eradicate pests from the field so the cattle don't break their legs. A gun in the city is a self-defense tool. I'm not hunting anything there. And just our situations will change our needs and change the way that we look at things. When I was a kid, the idea of someone not having first a hunter's permit and second a driver's license was just mind-blowing to me. I thought, well, what's wrong with your parents? They wouldn't help you get this. Why wouldn't you do this? I met a kid from China that explained to me, hey, I don't need a driver's license because I can ride public transportation everywhere. And I thought, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. And as I got older and lived in cities, I understood more things. So what I'm saying is a lot of these divides come from our situations. If I have a kid from an inner city that's never been to a country, I'll use an example. I had a kid from England. I think he lived in downtown London. I'm not exactly sure where. And we took him out behind the house and drove up to a gate, and there was an elk stand in there, and he just lost his mind and just didn't know how to handle it, in the same way that I might have lost my mind going into a city and, I don't know, seeing some gang activity or something. I'm having a hard time equate these two. But what I'm saying is, if we start with where are similar, we see that we're all good people and that we all mean well and we're all trying hard. But then we have to move to where our differences are so that we can see why those differences exist. But the only way to do that is to listen to how we come to the idea, or how we come to our conclusions, maybe about guns in the city versus guns in the country. When we start understanding that, we start realizing our actions have implications on other people. If I go to a city and I create a law that affects the country, that might be a negative thing. Just like if I go to a country and I create a law that affects the city, that might affect them negatively as well.
You're using the word, by the way, gun generically in a way that you suggested you shouldn't use the word abortion. When we're talking about guns, I think chances are most of us agree that a tank-mounted or even an RPG, a rocket-propelled grenade launcher, its chances are not something that should be had by most people. And so we're talking about a whole gradation of what it means to own guns, and I don't know of too many environments where an automatic rifle is really necessary. I have nothing against them, but I don't know of too many situations where an AR, say, is necessary, or an Uzi is necessary. I don't know of those situations. I don't think it's just purely situational. I get stuck where I think people end up in certain groups and they take on the identity of that group. And I worry every time I have a position, whether or not it's inside of that system. I don't know. Do we get stuck? Are we more controlled by the group than we think we are?
I think that's possible. Do you want to say something, Susan? I talk a lot.
No. Well, not
Okay.
about.
Okay.
No, I have an experience about, but it's about something else. But it's about kind of getting to the basic feeling or the thing that's inside of any issue as a way to find commonality with somebody else. Because I guess what I was thinking about, and if I'm going way off topic, that's fine. But I was thinking about some work I did during the presidential election, where I texted in virtually, obviously, in another state, in a place that was very different, and it didn't kind of sync with my my beliefs or my candidate. And I found you get maybe 1% people who are willing to talk with you. And if somebody was just very, very hostile, the conversation was going to clearly go nowhere. But there were people who I was able to engage with. And what I found was I had to find something that we had in common in order to have a meaningful engagement. And what I ended up landing on was COVID. Now, it's difficult because it is something that's very heavily laden now with extreme positions. But what I tried to do was to share my own experience, and I had a very, very significant experience with my family, and to connect to what that other person might feel. Have you lost somebody? Has anyone you know been ill or died? And what does that feel like?
Mm.
And then from there, how could we be better as a community and in our government and in our leadership to prevent more of that profound heartbreak?
Mm.
So I guess that's what I'm thinking about is if you pull it all away and you try to get, when you're talking about the things that bind us, then, what are those deep fundamental things that we all feel? Now, I'm not saying I changed anyone's vote, but I felt there was maybe we each walked away with a slightly better sense of who the other person was.
That's very beautiful.
Well, as I said, I don't know if it worked,
Well,
but it was important. It felt like,
yeah, I think when I said it's beautiful, I don't think sometimes it's a matter of whether or not it works. I mean,
right, it was,
you had in your mind somewhere, you had a hope that it would achieve a certain goal. But for me, the better goal was that you found a way to connect to the person about something that's personal, emotional, and had to do with something that we can all relate to: illness,
right.
illness in the family, and how that all affects us, whether you are a fascist or a socialist or whatever. Loss is loss, grief is grief,
Right.
illness is illness.
And that maybe that person could walk away thinking, oh, she's not one of those people from there who think that way in their bubble. And I also could feel that way about the person I was talking to, that, oh yeah, this person and his or her family have this, and community have the same
Yeah.
concerns. And from there, they move in another direction in terms of the concrete things about their lives, whether it's
Right.
guns or whatever. So,
And you chose an area where there's a shared vulnerability.
Mhm.
right. Right. I mean, it's hard to get there because, of course, COVID has been weaponized as
Yes.
well.
Yes.
So it's very hard to get there, but you have to really, if you work at it, we're all heartbroken, right?
Yeah.
We're all devastated by this.
We touched upon vulnerabilities a bit last week.
I genuinely believe that people on the left and people on the right are first and foremost people, and they see the same problem. They just have different solutions. And I think that that's how they start out the same. They go down that tree branch and then they split. And from there, once we understand that, at least that's my perspective, once I understand that, then I can say, okay, what's my goal? Do I want to change them, or do I just want to understand them? And maybe if I understand them, then they can understand me. And if they change, they change. And if they don't, they don't. But at least we're talking to each other. So now we can work together to come up with a solution for that same problem that we're pointing at, that same issue that we see.
But I think it goes to what Howard said before about how do we become so entrenched in our ideology or our beliefs that we can't accommodate for those distinctions, that difference. I can't, it's like I was mentioning last week that, on Facebook, I might have a conversation with someone with whom we agree on just everything, or I think we agree on just, or they, and all of a sudden I might say, well, we have to learn how to listen to the other people. I may not like it. It may feel like they're punching me in the face, when I listen to what they have to say from their point of view. But if I don't make an effort to listen to what they have to say, then why should I expect them to listen to what I have to say? And so we become so rigidly fixed to ideas and beliefs and associations to groups. And I think we all lose something very important in that process. I think, I'm thinking about in the psychoanalytic world, and I know Howard has mentioned this in other forums and things, that all the distinct training institutes that there are, and they all have their own little thing that they believe is the right way to do something, even though it all grows out of a single seed, but all these different forms start growing out of it, and then everyone becomes so protective of those associations and those theories that it becomes hard to listen to the other theory without feeling like that you're trying to take something away from them. And so I'm going back to this thing you said earlier, Tyler, about the guns. I'm sure there are a lot of people living in New York who own guns, who own them because they go hunting. A lot of people who live in urban environments have country homes, and they go up in the fall and they go hunting, and that's what they have their guns for. Personally, I don't understand why anyone would want to go and shoot another being for the pleasure of killing them for food. I don't think that the great majority of people who go hunting are in desperate need of food that they have to go out and kill a deer or an elk or even fish for a salmon, that it's so difficult for them. I think that a small minority of Americans actually depend on hunting to feed themselves and their families. Now, given the fact that I live in a city with the largest population in America, and as like a lot of people joke around, so you have people live in rural environments where they hunt for food, and they have 2 senators just like they do in California that has, 15 million people living in California, however many people. And so I personally, the argument that I have to have a gun because I have to go and defend my farm or my livestock or go out hunting for food. 85% of my thinking, I just feels like, really you have to have a gun for those things? You really need to kill an animal? You really need to have this relationship with other animals as if they are there for your pleasure and for you to go out and kill them as if they are just some kind of inorganic object with no feelings, no emotional lives of their own. So there's another big topic.
I mean, to get at that, your concern with guns is not about a philosophical difference here. Your concern is, again, getting back to, I think, what I learned from Susan about moving towards the vulnerability. You feel there's a danger involved in having 300 million guns in the country. I mean, that's what motivates you, is that danger. That's what scares you. I mean, what scares me, I don't know what scares the rest of you, it is I honestly, after a lot of situations that happened in the past 7 or 8 years, I feel that as a member of a minority, I could conceivably be singled out to be harmed, and not just myself. I'm old, but my grandchildren who are having a rough time in colleges with being singled out because of their views. So it's a real fear what motivates me. And I wonder if there aren't in general fears that keep us closed into small groups where we feel identified with something larger. I don't know.
Well, I think I just want to just clarify something I was saying is that, and I think it goes to what you're saying, Howard, about the fear. I also have to take into account the fear of the animals that are being killed for the pleasure of human beings, their fear. And it's this sense of, and maybe it applies to a lot of the things we're talking about, it's this sense of authority or power over other subjects, other life forms, the sense that we have a right to enforce our will on other beings, including other people, groups of people, whether they're Black Americans or Native Americans or Hispanics or Jewish Americans or Asian Americans, that we have a right to do that because we have the power. We have the power to do that. And as long as we have the power to do it, we will continue to do it over whoever or whatever life form we feel like we do it, no matter what the ramifications, the long-term ramifications is to our own personal existence. Think about overfishing the oceans, dumping plastic into the oceans. I think about overkilling wildlife, you know, and these things we do without thinking them through, how they affect our personal lives in the moment or in the long run. So I think that if I can apply your thought about fear to it, I think that's a big thing. I think fear is a big motivating factor.
I think there's that fear of loss of power and the need to solidify your power is what's driven so many, social constructions. I mean, we talk a lot now about race and how it doesn't really exist, but it's a theory that was developed to hold on to economic power. And so maybe that's the fundamental need of human beings. Maybe there are fundamental needs to be tribal, and it's maybe there's some need to have power, and however you're able to get it.
If it didn't exist, if the notion of race didn't exist,
Right.
We invented it for exactly the purposes, the reason that you have just mentioned. And that as I was listening this morning is one thing he pointed out is that it feels so good to be white because I have power. And I don't have to think of myself as being a member of a race. I just have to think of myself as being a member of the privileged power group.
So safe. I mean,
so safe.
So safe.
Yeah, and we have those men in blue to protect us against them.
Yeah.
And they have the guns. And we have the guns.
Yeah.
Because the laws enable us to buy those AR-15s, whatever they are, that Howard's talking about, or the picture I saw of some guy at a Walmart with that rocket launcher on his strapped around his back.
You didn't see a guy with a rocket launcher on a
or it was a bazooka or something strapped around over his back. It was something like that.
Okay. It was probably an AR-15.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't an AR-15. It was a big tube, that was reminiscent of one of those, I don't know what those had a
RPGs.
rocket things. Yeah,
We don't have a fact checker.
right. That's right.
What I was going to say was that sense of safety could be taken away in a second. And Howard saying, his grandchildren feel vulnerable in academia. Yeah. And we're seeing now how it could be another group. And we've seen in history like that. It could be somebody else. And right now, my Asian friends in New York feel very vulnerable.
Yep.
Very vulnerable. So, our safety is Tenuous.
Very tenuous.
So let me address that, because I feel like this conversation just jumped off the left cliff, which is okay. That's why I'm here. We start together, we get to a point on the tree branch and we diverge. This is that point. So for the exact same reasons that you three, I assume, Susan, are against guns, are the reasons why
I say.
I
one
assume, I don't
word
know.
about guns.
I don't know.
This discussion, this is the first time I've used the word
Okay, Howard and Neil.
I'm a gun owner.
about existential safety.
Sorry, I'm a gun
So
owner
you need
and
forever.
have been for a long time.
I'm not trying to trigger
Oh my God, there goes our friendship right down the drain, Howard.
Howard, you just became my homie. So this is all I'm trying to say. For the exact same reasons that were just listed to not have guns available are the exact same reasons that I want access to guns. You need to, and let me, without talking about my perspective, let me just back up for a second. I grew up on a ranch. You already know this. We had guns in our house all the time. I was shooting guns at the age of 5. I looked at them in the same way I looked at a fire extinguisher or a spatula or a knife. You respect it. It's a tool that can hurt you, but it's just a tool. So moving forward in life, I joined the military at the young age. I went through state and federal law enforcement training. I've been through contractor training. My whole life have used guns as a tool. And I don't believe any laws should exist that restrict my right to continue to use those tools, because it will inhibit my ability to protect myself and other people. So when you're talking, Neil, about the different ethnic groups that you mentioned, I think they should all be armed. If there's a subgroup that has a problem with some sort of oppression, all the more reason why you listed, if I remember correctly, Asian, Jewish, and Black people. Why would you not want to arm yourself to protect yourself against a situation like this? I'm not saying start fights. I'm not saying shoot people. I'm saying arm yourself. The majority of crime is stopped by the fact that there's a disparity of force equalizer. If I have a big, large, bad, scary guy, I don't have to shoot him. Just having the gun's going to keep him from hurting me. And I know that that's a big, deep pothole that I stepped in, but I have to say that I fear not having access in the same way that you fear other people have them. I have an AR-15. I've got multiple Glocks. I've got shotguns. I've got long rifles. I use a long rifle to deer hunt. I use the shotgun to shoot skeet and to hunt ducks. I use the AR-15 primarily for training purposes. I hope I never really have to use it, but I'm glad that I have it, in the same way that I'm glad that I have fire extinguishers. The best way to fight violence is intense and immediate violence. It stops instances immediately, and I know this empirically because I've been involved in them. So, sorry, talk to me, because I see you all squirming.
No, I'm just wondering, what violence are you talking about? The violence that all these guns are going to create because people have these guns in order to go out and murder each other on the street. So I'm going to escalate the amount of guns I have because the other group now has a Glock and I had a Glock. Now I need an AR-15 because they equal. I always have to raise the ante all the time because I perceive this violence. Where is this violence? Where is it? And why do I fear that it's going to happen on the streets of America? On the streets of America, or in the farmlands of America, or in the mountains of America? Where is all this violence that people are so afraid of? And why do we have police then? Why do we need police if everyone's going to arm themselves? If I was a policeman and I was facing that reality that you're painting, I would put my gun down. I'd run for my life because I don't want to get caught in the middle of all that violence.
I'd like to say something.
I'm sorry, I'm a little heated on this.
But Tyler, you began saying things as facts, and Neil, you responded to that as if it was an incursion. And I think that's one of the reasons I feel it's better not to offer things as if I really know the absolute truth about these things. I can have beliefs about such things. And indeed, I don't know. I'd be interested in what your beliefs are, and maybe they are precisely, Tyler, what you're expressing as facts. Um, you said, for instance, that the way to stop violence is by having the potential victims of that violence able to protect themselves. You stay in that. It's a sociological, psychological argument that I'm sure can be made, but we don't have fact checkers. We don't have I'm the only statistician here, and I'm not doing this work for you. Sorry. Uh, I was a statistician. I kind of am not anymore. But that's the kind of thing I think that causes these situations to become heated. Uh, I think we have to be careful expressing things as facts. We know what we feel. I don't claim that I'm really at danger because of my ethnicity. I feel that I'm at
Mhm.
danger. I fear for my grandchildren. I do. I talk to them. I hear the conversations they have. I hear even out here how they've been kind of targeted for having their views and for having their religious background. I worry about that. Do I really know that there's evidence there? Our chances are 6 million Jews in the United States. There have only been a couple of dozen killed uh, recently in violent attacks. I mean, you have a better chance of getting poisoned by your mother on a holiday, especially if your mother's getting old, you know? Uh, so again, my suggestion is that if we're going to move into in the next 20 minutes any areas, we be careful that we not claim to have any kind of absolute knowledge of these things.
Howard, I always brought a food taster with me to my mother's Seder.
I mean, express my sympathy to your partner. You know, is that why we have partners to taste the food?
That's right. You try this.
Probably explain that to my wife, but I don't think we can solve the gun problem here. But there is a sense that you have, it seems that this is an important part of your life, Tyler. It's part of the fabric of growing up on the northern plains or in the mountains or in the rock. It's part of your life, and it's not part of life necessarily here. It is part of life in in many poor areas of the cities on the East Coast. It is.
Yeah.
You own a gun. You're 13 years old. You own a gun. It's a bar mitzvah present. You know, you own a gun and you're not afraid to use it. And if we stay inside of those beliefs, I think we have a chance of actually talking about some of these things.
I think that the threat for that 13-year-old is far more real. The reason why he puts a gun in his backpack. I know that in the school I work with, we only had one issue with a gun once, but I know that from talking to children who grew up in Gowanus or Red Hook or the projects around the schools where I work, was that I'm not so sure that I would feel safe if I was one of them if I didn't have a gun somewhere in the house or carried a knife in my pocket or a box cutter, because of the constant real life threat that was always present in my life to my person or my family's person or my group's person.
Also, at that age, your sense of your immortality, you have a very different view of what it really means to be out there, and you're a kid and you're invulnerable.
Yeah.
Right? You're in magic land still. It's sad. It's all
Yeah.
very sad. We're talking about something that's just incredibly sad. And how do we deal with that sadness that's affecting our country?
And also, I think, not to hang on to the gun issue too long, one of the things that concerns me about the conversation about guns is often that we don't speak about guns in the same way when we talk about Tyler owning guns and the young boy living in a Black community, in a Black ghetto, owning a gun. We don't look at it the same way. That child is a potential criminal and he's a danger to society because his gun, but Tyler has them because this is something he enjoys doing for his pleasure, and he's not, and for hunting and for target practice and for training. And so we often we assume one thing about Tyler and guns and something else about the 13, 14, 15 or 16-year-old young man or girl who lives in a housing project in Brooklyn or New York City or Philadelphia as having a gun. We don't say that they have them for some of the same basic reasons. Self-defense.
I was just going to make that point. You kind of already made it, but the thing that I'm arguing is not for 13-year-old inner city kids to have guns. I would love to see them to have gun training. I would be all right with them having NRA courses in high school so that they can understand what they do, what they don't do, how to respect them. And a belief of mine is the solution lies in education and more access once you're educated. I know that that's not a popular opinion, but I also know that historically it worked. So even though we can't pull up facts, we all come from a history where guns were, everyone had it. It was a tool. And it was just something that we all had and our ancestors all had and used because that's just what we did. Everyone's ancestors had some kind of weaponry. There's no arguing against that one.
Books, didn't get them very far. Made them kind of vulnerable, but that was about it.
So what I'm trying to say is that they are a defense mechanism that should be respected and used properly. And when they are respected and used properly, they're a positive tool. They're obviously amoral. Guns aren't the problem. People are the problem. The fact that that 13-year-old has the gun, yeah, that's a problem, but not because of the gun. It's because we've got a situation where we have children that don't think the police are going to protect them. So they've gone out and gotten some sort of a weapon to protect themselves. And they're not wrong, which is part of the problem. So we need to address the actual problem and not attack the gun, which in turn attacks rights of people like me. Remember how earlier I said when it starts to affect the person, that's where you really get strong opinions about it, which is part of where my strong opinions come from.
It's interesting. We started off with the lesson on the Golden Rule and the 10 Commandments, and coming towards the end, I'm thinking about what it says in the Bible about beating swords into plowshares. And the brilliant project that an artist did, I don't know how long ago, about where he offered to pay people to bring their guns to him, and he beat them all down and built beautiful sculptures out of the guns that people were handing into him for the $5 or $10 or $50 he was paying for them. So I hear what you're saying, Tyler, but for me, de-escalation is the answer. And I would, if I was still teaching in the public schools and someone made that recommendation, I'd say, well, instead of that, why not have more peer intervention programs? Why not have more of the ACLU programs come in, or the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, peer intervention, peer mediation programs? Instead of teaching kids how to use weapons carefully, why not teach them how to resolve their problems, like what we're doing here, resolve their problems in more meaningful and in more meaningful ways, where they don't have to think about, I have a gun to protect myself.
Right.
They can think about, I have a thought or a feeling or an idea that might be useful to disarm my enemy, and we might end up building a spaceship that goes to Jupiter together.
Exactly.
Why not both?
The name for Alice's initial initiative was Waging Dialogue. And I've always thought that that was a terrific
Yeah.
phrase. And,
Yeah, it is.
very powerful.
But does it have to be waging dialogue? Do we have?
Well, I think the idea was that
Mm,
the aggression is there, right? So
Yeah.
it's that, that's so you want to wage. That's some human need to wage. I don't want to speak for her, but
We can all speak to the best time to talk
we've worked
behind
together
someone's
for a long
back
time.
is when
So,
they're not there, you know.
yeah.
Uh,
But
Are we getting a wage for doing this?
yeah.
I am. I mean, I don't.
You are.
No.
I would like to say something though. As we're coming near the end, I feel as if I haven't gotten to know you folks. I feel I know how you think, Tyler, a little bit, but I have no idea how you feel. I know you like to tell jokes. I know you love your
Bad
kids,
jokes.
apparently. I don't know if they're bad jokes. They aren't my kind of jokes, but they're jokes. I mean, not good joke, but joke. You tell jokes. And I would have loved to have had a better idea of. I have somewhat more of a feeling for you, Susan. I at least fantasize. Here I am fantasizing about you, sitting there and thinking, where is this going, and how do I help this along? I think of you as kind of someone who would like to be helping this process really along, a kind of a doula. Uh, 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 who could give birth,
no,
or something.
I think I've said this a few times, both on and off, in the Facebook group, that I think that a lot can be gained by showing curiosity and asking other people, who are you and what have you done with your life? And I think that that's kind of where you begin. What's your experience? So I think curiosity about another person can go a long way. So
And not as rhetorical questions, but
yeah,
real
yeah.
as real curiosity. I
Yeah.
am really curious, Tyler, about who you are and what it's like to be you, to grow up where you did, where the views you have, and what it's like. I remember having little kids and what that was like a little bit. My kids, I still have a baby. She's in her mid 40s, but I mean, my other kids are in their 50s and old men already. I don't remember exactly what it's like, but I have some idea. But I don't know what it's like to have these notions of how the world should work in terms of guns and abortion. I don't understand that set of feelings that go into it. And I would have liked to have heard more. I mean, we still have time. And Neil, I feel I have some kind of kinship with, even though I know nothing about Buddhism except the fact that I hate the fact that the Buddha left the night that his son was born. That always pisses me off. That's my whole attachment to Buddhism, I'm afraid. But I, I have a sense that you come from that world, the feeling, and that's the way you think through things.
Well,
And,
I have to just correct this notion. I'm not a Buddhist
oh,
because what's the word? I reject all definitions. There are things about Buddhism that I really like,
okay, yeah.
but I'm not a practicing Buddhist. I don't, because that bothers me. I just remember I was studying meditation and dance at the Naropa Institute in Colorado, which is was founded by a great Buddhist teacher, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. And I went out there, and I just remembered that even there, I lived outside of the community. So I just remember one incident where I was living in a house with, was owned by a woman who was very involved in the Buddhist community, and two other women who were also, they were all involved in the Institute. And I was just there to take classes, and I would go to meditate. And one time, and I would meditate in my room. And someone questioned me because I wasn't doing the thing. You know, I wasn't going to all the classes. And she just said, "This is the way Neil does it. This is how he does it." So that's how I approach Buddhism in terms of, you know, I do meditate, and I do yoga, and I like the notion. I like the broader aspects of it in terms of its just anyway. So but I don't want to be defined as being a Buddhist, or, you know, it's, yeah. I was a Buddhist before they were Buddhists.
I don't want to be defined from the outside by anyone, but I would like to be understood a little bit in terms.
But I think that in some ways, yeah, it'd be nice to go on with this, to get to know you all a whole lot more. But I think in some ways, I heard and experienced things from everybody that gave me deeper insights. Even though, like Susan says, she likes to do things more than talk about them last week, or just, you know, to be a person of action. And that's an important thing to know about you. You know, that so when you're sitting there, you know, there were times when you're sitting there and I'm saying to myself, oh, listen, the three men taking over the space, you know, forgetting there's a woman in the room and not letting her speak. And I realized then I remember what you said last week, that you're very patient, and you listen, and you absorb, and you take in. And when you wanted to talk, you talked. And it wasn't a matter of male prerogative.
I would say, however, that a lot can be accomplished by a bunch of people sitting down and breaking bread together.
Yes.
And that's something I have to say that women do. Right?
Mm.
We do get together, and our impulse is to form community.
Yeah.
And so nothing that a good dinner party wouldn't help. We'll leave you with that. My
Are there closing comments anyone wants to make? We have about 3 minutes.
Guys, ever want to come shooting? I'll pay for the bullets. Come on out.
Thank you. Absolutely not.
That's a free open invitation, or hiking, or anything else.
I'll come out with my binoculars and my walking sticks. That's about it.
I got
I'm out with my bugle. Every time I saw an animal, I'd start blowing it real loudly.
Shofar.
Shofar.
Yeah, I hesitate, but is it Psalms that says, can a shofar be blown in the city and the people not tremble? Well, I have my own bullets, but does anyone else have anything to say before we leave?
I
You guys
enjoyed
are
this very
awesome.
much. Yeah, this was good.
Great.
Yeah, thank you. I think we survived, and we touched on some issues, didn't we?
Yes, we did.
And nobody died. That's cool.
I don't know how.